The key to returning us to maritime dominance is carrying our nation's commerce. That's what this industry is for. We are about carrying our nation's commerce. We have two primary roles in the merchant marine. One, carry our nation's commerce, and two, carry our nation to war. Full stop. And if we carry our nation's commerce, if we get that part right, carrying us to war comes naturally.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Steve Wills from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just located outside of Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. Thank you to Jonathan Group Defense for sponsoring Season 5 of Maritime Nation, and let's jump right in. We are honored today to be joined by the Honorable Stephen M. Carmel. He's the 21st Administrator of the Maritime Administration, MARAD, at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Before joining MARAD, Mr. Carmel was the President of U.S. Marine Management, LLC, USMMI. U.S. Marine Management was formerly a division of Maersk Line Limited, where, prior to the spinoff to Maritime Partners, Mr. Carmel was Senior Vice President, responsible for USMMI Business Unit. USMMI operates a variety of ship types, including tankers, roll-on, roll-off vessels, and military special purpose ships. Prior to this position, Mr. Carmel headed technical operations for MLL. He previously held positions in operations and finance for U.S. Marine Management Incorporated and Maersk Line Limited. Mr. Carmel began his career sailing as a deck officer and master primarily on tankers. Mr. Carmel graduated from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in 1979. He holds an M.A. in economics and M.B.A. in international finance from Old Dominion University and is a PhD ABD in international studies with an emphasis on international political economy and second emphasis in conflict. He is a certified management accountant and is also certified in financial management. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan Ross School of Business and Advanced Management Programs. His research and publishing interests are in maritime security, globalization, trade, conflict, and Arctic regional issues. Mr. Carmel recently rotated off a position with the Naval Studies Board of the National Academies of Sciences. He's a former member of the Chief of Naval Operations Executive Panel, the Maritime Studies Board of the National Academy of Sciences, and the NOAA Hydrographic Services Review Panel. And he was a 2009 Senior Fellow at the Homeland Security Policy Institute at the George Washington University. He serves on the board of directors of the Hampton Roads Global Affairs Council and is a past member of the Board of Visitors at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Steve was awarded the Meritorious Public Service Award by the Chief of Naval Operations in 2017. And he and his wife, Allison, and their son, John, live in Norfolk, Virginia, but he's moving up here now in his new role as the Maritime Administrator. And, sir, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to Maritime Nation. And over to Admiral Fogo for the first question. Thank you so much.
All right. Terrific. I'm honored, Steve. Great introduction. And Director Carmel, thanks for being here. I just want to start out with a broad-based question on what actually is MARAD. Now, we have 170 Navy councils around the country that are probably listening in. We have people overseas. We have a following that varies from folks that are just interested in learning more about the sea services and those who have actually served and been on the bridge of a ship and know a lot about it. But I'd like to get your cut on what is MARAD and what are your top priorities for MARAD, and how do you see the agency's role evolving as maritime policy becomes more central to national security and economic resilience? We just had the MAP plan come out of the White House. We're all excited about that. But over to you, kind of a broad view.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Thank you, Admiral Fogo, for having me. Great to see Old friends again. So first, what is MARAD? The Maritime Administration is an agency in the Department of Transportation, and our role, simply put, is to promote the U.S. maritime industry. We are not a regulatory agency. We are a promotional agency, and our job is, as the name suggests, to promote the U.S. flag maritime industry and all aspects of it, and that includes, the deep sea shipping, shipyards, ports, anything it takes to make this country a great maritime power, which unfortunately that's kind of fallen off the wayside, and that's one of the most exciting things about being where we are right now, and certainly one of my major goals in what we're doing now is to do exactly that, to advance the president's agenda of making us a maritime power again. And that means a number of things. First, as you mentioned, the map drop. So we have a lot of work to do to implement that. Around that, I think if you were going to summarize it all in one thing, is the maritime industry needs to be treated as an ecosystem. It's a pile of pieces that have to be dealt with all at the same time. And part of the problems of our past is that we've tended to try and stovepipe this stuff. And we deal with the maritime industry as individual segments. We implement a piece here and a piece there that advances a specific interest. We don't pay attention to what the unintended consequences or the interactions are, and actually, as in all good policy, the real outcome comes from the interactions, not of policy, not the specific instance. And so this is a lot like for you engineers out there. If you have a system of simultaneous equations, trying to break it down and split up the equations, and I'm going to hand one to you and one to you and say, here, solve that equation, and then try and put them all back together again and come to a workable solution. And we know that doesn't work. So we have a lot to do, and we have a lot to do all at the same time. We can't break it up. So that's number one. Inside of that, we have to start thinking rationally about what it means to build at scale, which is the key to returning our shipbuilding enterprise to what it needs to be. I just think we've lost the bubble on that. We may come back to it later, but the last time we produced a ship for the international market was October 1960.
Is that right?
Ouch.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So that's not only, I mean, we have structurally disengaged from that market. I mean, we just don't even know what it looks like. So that's a serious problem. But building at scale is a key to getting our costs down to where we need to be. In terms of cargo, we tend to talk about cargo like we're going to solve our industry's problems on the back of U.S. government cargo preference. Not going to happen. While that's a critical part of keeping us going right now, the key to returning us to maritime dominance is carrying our nation's commerce. That's what this industry is for. We are about carrying our nation's commerce. We have two primary roles in the merchant marine. One, carry our nation's commerce, and two, carry our nation to war. Full stop. And if we carry our nation's commerce, if we get that part right, carrying us to war comes naturally. So I know, kind of to sum it up, we have a lot going on. I call it as being at the intersection of great promise and great peril. We have a great opportunity here. The peril is if we get it wrong. Lots of hearings and testimony and articles and everything about restoring U.S. maritime dominance. If we get this wrong, in the very near future, we're going to be having hearings and writing articles about how do we live without maritime dominance, because we will lose it and forever be beholden to our peer competitors that do have it. So we have a lot to do in a short period of time.
That's fantastic. If I may just follow up with a couple of observations. First of all, I love the characterization of MARAD as operating in an ecosystem. Couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a very complicated ecosystem, and our listeners may or may not know that you actually work for the Secretary of Transportation over in the Department of Transportation, which is right next to the Washington Navy Yard. We know that well. Relatively new building. And when you talk about an ecosystem, Secretary Duffy has got an ecosystem that includes air traffic control. It's an antiquated system. He's got roads, bridges, trains, sea lift, all that stuff. And that's a heck of a lot to keep track of for one cabinet member. So you're there to really help him. And if I'm not mistaken, you're an unlimited master, right? So you've actually been on the con and driven ships all over the world and got a lot of mileage at sea. So that's fantastic. Loved what you had to say about cargo, and the mission is to carry the nation's cargo and support the nation in wartime. We're shifting to the Pacific. Steve and I have talked a lot about, and in returning from Ebb Tide, written a lot about the Gulf Wars and the mountain of stuff that we moved, to Kuwait to prepare for these wars. We may have to do that again, and yet in the Pacific, the tyranny of distance is a much more difficult problem. So we need hulls, we need mariners, we need skills, and I think that we're a bit in the hole right now, and I hope you can help us dig out in your term as the Maritime Administrator.
That's a perfect lead in to question 2. So you talked about an ecosystem, and part of that ecosystem is obviously shipyards. So looking back, sir, what lessons should policymakers and industry take from the closure of Mare Island out in California, and how should those lessons inform today's efforts to rebuild specifically shipbuilding and maritime industrial capacity? Thank you.
That is a great question, and it actually brings up something in terms of the national dialogue and debate that I think we don't pay enough attention to. The whole conversation is always about shipbuilding, and we have a lot to do there. That's great conversation alone, but the often ignored part of this is ship repair. Ship repair is a completely different industry, different economics, different technical drivers, and we don't talk enough about that. But our ship repair industry is in trouble too. Now, there are healthy, good ship repair yards, but that's not the way I would characterize the industry writ large. We talk a lot about how we don't build our own ships. The simple fact is we don't repair our own ships either. The U.S. repair industry, I don't think, is capable, simply not capable, of being able to repair the U.S. flag fleet that operates in the Maritime Security Program, for instance. They simply couldn't do it. The capacity isn't there. The yards aren't big enough. So there's a lot of issues there that have to be solved. And I think a lot of this comes down to, first, exactly what we were talking about before. We stovepipe things and we don't deal with it as a system. This all has to be brought up together. Labor, repair yards, ship construction yards, all of this has to be brought up together. What we tend to do is you see a yard in trouble and we'll throw a little money at it. We'll toss an RF contract at it, trying to keep it alive. That doesn't solve the bigger problem of yards that need to be kept healthy. And by healthy, I mean making the kinds of investments they need to make in automation, in workforce development, and capacity, yard layout, everything to actually be truly competitive yards, so that if we said to the folks under U.S. flag now, hey, you guys got to start doing your repair work in the States, that they wouldn't, head straight for the rails and, lean over the side. We need to get to the point where we're repairing our own ships as well as building them, and we have a long way to go to get there, and that is a critical thing. And let me mention right out of the gate, when I talk about automation, I know that that's a sensitive topic. In this country, for whatever reason, automation has become synonymous with losing jobs. And that is wrong. It needs to be wrong. We need to change that dialogue. It's almost like what I call an Overton window problem. When we talk about automation, what we need to do is talk about how do we expand output faster than we expand input. Not that we're cutting input. We need to be able to deal with automation and technology in a way that brings labor with us, that makes labor part of the solution, because we're going to fail if we don't do that. So, there's a lot that goes into fixing this. So the answer to Mare Island is not that we should have gone and bailed out Mare Island. I don't believe that. I'm sorry for the folks that work there, but I work on the principle that sometimes capital should fail. That's part of a dynamic economy. Schumpeter's creative destruction. Capital needs to be redeployed. What can't fail is labor. So what we need to do is find a way for capital to get redeployed to yards that are effective, efficient, prioritize assistance to those yards, and in the meantime, make sure we take care of labor, make sure the labor force is upgraded and is mobile enough to get to the yards that are successful. So what it all boils down to is just a rethink of how we approach the repair sector.
Excellent. Admiral Fogo. over to
Fantastic.
you.
I want to talk about the National Defense Reserve Fleet, which you know a lot about, Steve, and you're responsible for. I'll just take you back to my own experience, one ship, but it was absolutely amazing. Back in 2013, I knew that orders were pending for me to go out to Sixth Fleet, and Admiral Mark Ferguson knew that he was heading out to command Naval Forces Europe, Naval Forces Africa. So we had gotten together and compared notes on a number of different things that we were going to try to implement while we were in theater. And at the time, Admiral Ferguson was the vice chief, and one day he said to me in the passageways of the Pentagon, "Hey, what are you doing Saturday?" And I said, "At your service." He goes, "We're going down to Norfolk, and we're going to investigate a hull that could be used as a chemical weapons destruction platform."
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, that's cool, because we were looking at all these chemical weapons in Syria, and when the United States failed to endorse a red line, the Russians got involved. There was a negotiation, and so all this sarin gas and chlorine gas, hundreds of tons of gas, had to go someplace, and the Syrians actually agreed to turn it over to neutral parties, which consisted of Russians, Chinese, and Danes and Americans. So we end up on this ship, the USNS Cape Ray. And I'm telling you, walking on board that ship, I was expecting to see a ship not in the greatest state of readiness, but it was in pretty good shape. There was no rust, things were clean, and there was a lot of space. And within, I just think, a couple of months, 1/4 of a calendar year, that ship was turned into a platform that could destroy chlorine gas or sarin gas. A whole factory was lifted on board, and she got underway. And she went and did the job. And you don't have to, it's not a complicated process. You, I think, heat sarin to a point where it just neutralizes, and chlorine is mixed with a reagent that then becomes fertilizer. But an absolutely amazing thing. So this Ready Reserve Fleet is versatile. It's ready. It can lift stuff. It can do special missions. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I wonder if we should be focusing on retiring some of the older vessels and replacing them with newer used ships, or should the United States move into a domestically built production program to build new ships? And we talked earlier about the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel that, you know, essentially the idea was commissioned by one of your predecessors, who I love, Admiral Buzz Busby. And Steve and I have been to the yard up in Philadelphia, now at the Hanwha Philadelphia yard, twice, and we're very impressed with those platforms. I think 3 in the water, 2 to go, on budget, on time, and I think the Merchant Marine Academy is getting a lot of bang for their buck. So what do you think? Should we be shipbuilders, or should we be buyers of vessels that exist?
So it's a interesting problem. First, should we be shipbuilders? Yes, there's absolutely a role for us and for MARAD in this as shipbuilders. NMSV's great success. The vessel construction manager, great job. Shout out to the folks at Tote that did that. My friends out there at Tote, Tim Nolan and company, great people, great job. So, and there's definitely a role for that. And then, as you know, there's a requirement beyond that for construction of some new construction strategic sea lift ships. So that's in the ways that contract hasn't been. We're just finalizing the designs for that. So and there is absolutely a role for that. It's good seed work for shipyards. It's also great platforms for experimentation. It's one of the things MARAD can do. We can use ships like that to trial things, new technologies and
ROVs, unmanned. I mean, Admiral calls that the hedge strategy. Something to give the manned warships a hedge over the adversary. And if you put the ROVs in the water, you're not killing sailors if they become expendable.
So ships that the United States owns are very useful things. In terms of the broader structure, first I got to say this: it's the fact that we need a RRF indicates a failed maritime policy right out of the gate. If we were doing what we talked about
It's
first,
an interesting perspective.
carrying the nation's commerce and doing it and doing that successfully, we wouldn't need this. We would have a fleet that exists that was capable of recall, and we just wouldn't need it. But the fact that we do, hopefully we'll get to the point where our U.S. flag fleet is large enough where this just isn't a requirement anymore. But it is now, and so we have to deal with it. And so there's another perspective to this. At the end of the day, old ship guys like we are know, and I don't mean you when I say old. I mean,
No. Count me in. Yeah, I'm 66.
So but ships are not designed to sit and do nothing. I mean, that's just a fact. Ships are not designed to do nothing. They don't deal well with inactivity. And so I worry a lot about ships that appear to be ready, but are not. And when called up, they're just not there. So they just don't perform. And we know the turbo activations and all the readiness stuff that came out of that.
About the turbos,
it's just not. And the model itself isn't working. So I think we need to rethink this. So we have one element that's the new construction stuff, and I think that's important. Then I think we need a different model that deals with some of the legacy problems of having the U.S. government owning ships that do nothing. And that creates some problems. The do nothing we talked about. It's expensive, that sort of stuff. It also locks the government into a fleet architecture that is not changeable. You cannot adapt that fleet architecture to evolving threats. The composition of the RRF reflects the threats that existed, 20, 30 years ago, not the threats that exist today. So I challenge you to tell me how a 2 or 3,000 lane meter Roro is going to fit into island hopping in the Pacific. So, the fleet architecture is locked when we own them. There are other alternatives where the government leans on commercial industry to provide the tonnage in readiness, where the government can get it anytime it wants. It's sitting at a pier ready to go, but it's operated by the commercial companies that own them. They rotate in and out. So that the companies that own them take good care of them because they know they're going to get them back. It allows the fleet architecture to be adjusted more or less on the fly. And no ship sits very long without doing something, without, returning to service. So there are ways that we can rely on the industry. I call it the dynamic RRF solution, where we are relying on industry to provide that capacity. It's there. It's callable at will. We can get it anytime we want. But we ensure that when I say modern, these guys are, no more than 10 years old. They're actively trading ships that are just switched into reserve status for a year or two and then rotated out. What we need to get to, I guess, if you want to summarize it, my opinion is that MARAD needs to be less a caretaker of assets and more a provider of capability. And there is a very big difference between those concepts.
That's a great analogy. And just to follow up before we go to Steve, not a caretaker of assets, a provider of capability really resonates with me, and I think our listeners as well. Yeah. And I think it was back in 2013, 2014, when I was working on a piece for Proceedings that ultimately we called the Global Network of Navies, and it was about allies and partners coming together. I mean, Admiral Mullen had a version in his time that was the 1,000-ship Navy.
Yes.
This one was a little softer in its approach and expectations for the allies. Like, we're not going to demand that you do this, but if you want to be part of it. But coming up with the title was challenging. And at one point, I thought I'm going to call it the Global Fleet in Being. And I asked John Kirby about this, who's a great public affairs officer, and he said, "Don't do that. Fleet in Being is a fleet that sits alongside the pier. Doesn't do anything, right?" And what you just said about why do we have an RRF and it sits alongside the pier, and then what do those mariners do? They're either on the ship or not on the ship, but expected to be able to get underway on the ship.
Yes.
You go underway, as you pointed out, turbo activations, not necessarily the best results for readiness and maintenance. There's problems, and we should not put our mariners and our officers on ships that are not ready to go and relatively new and capable of carrying out the mission. So couldn't agree with you more. Fleet in Being is a term that was a World War I Scapa Flow term between two wars. We had a lot of extra ships, and we didn't pay for maintenance and readiness, and we can't fall into that hole again. And I'm afraid, frankly, we have. but I love what you've said about provider of capabilities. And I think that'll be one of the points that really resonate with the audience here.
Can I ask?
Please, yeah.
One
go
thing
ahead.
about that, and because I forgot to mention it, one of the other real issues with the RRF, the way it's currently structured, it is actually a major stressor on the labor pool. To the extent that
It was that.
it's because the ships are only partially manned, very minimally.
Yeah.
And when you have a labor force that is scaled to take care of steady state operations, nobody sits on the beach very long. Everybody has a job when they want it. So, the labor force is good. That labor force is too small to surge the RRF. There are not enough people when you got to, crew up all those ships. If you have a labor force that is big enough to reliably crew up all those ships when you need them, then it's too big in steady state, and you have a lot of people sitting around waiting for a job. So it's a bad match on the RRF. I'm sorry, on the labor force. It's very stressful on the labor force. What tends to happen, and I know this from experience, you do an activation of an RRF ship, and what happens is you go in, and the unions, without fail, provide the people. No question. Unions are all very good. All of them are very good about this. But they are people that have regular jobs somewhere in another line. They're doing this to make sure that the ship gets out and gets tested. But that means that they're not available. When the time comes, at some point, it's going to be a shortage. They did this. They're going to park the ship, and they're going to go back to their real job. If they're expected to be out there for 3 years in a real-world scenario, that's a problem. That's a problem.
I see your point. Excellent. You are listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Jonathan Group Defense. Jonathan Group is an industry leader in rugged mechanical packaging solutions for critical electronic systems on land, at sea, and in the air. Jonathan Group designs and manufactures rugged and shielded rack mounting architecture, shock and vibration analysis and assemblies, as well as integrated systems, backplanes, and chassis for embedded applications. More than 65 design and manufacturing engineers operate over 650,000 square feet of manufacturing floor space across North America to deliver solutions deployed in unforgiving environments. They are recognized and distinguished by a proven track record that has garnered the trust of top leading defense, aerospace, industrial, and server data storage corporations. Jonathan Group's ultra-precise engineering and high-fidelity manufacturing support our surface ships, aircraft, and submarines. They keep our sensitive electronic equipment high, dry, and shockproof. If it's still working, it's Jonathan. Steve, back to you.
So you pointed out that if we grow our commercial fleet, then you can take up ships more easily from the commercial side. And that leads us into our next question, which is something like that we do now, and that's the Tanker Security Program and the Maritime Security Program fleets, where we take up ships from commercial activities and make them available for those missions. Do you believe these programs should be expanded? And if so, what scale of growth would be necessary to meet future sea lift and national security demands? So we're not on the RFF, we're on commercial
We're on
vessels.
the MSP and TSP.
Yep.
And before I go into MSP and TSP, I'm going to foot stomp on something. We tend to forget the CSP, Cable Ship Security Program.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Cable
So
ships, too, yes.
a quick data point.
Absolutely necessary.
The U.S., of course, has a trade surplus in services. $660 billion of that trade surplus is data deliverable. That means that trade is delivered on subsea cables. That is actually almost 7 times larger than the value of U.S. trade carried on U.S. flagships. all carried on subsea cable. But in fact, subsea cables are responsible for almost all of the $2 trillion in U.S. international trade, simply because the cables carry the international financial flows and information flows that enable that trade. So, and we have completely and totally outsourced that capability. The U.S. has no organic capability for cable maintenance and laying and cable maintenance. TE Subcom, great company, great people, do an admirable job, but their fleet is they are the members of the Cable Ship Security Program, and they do mostly work for DoD. In terms of the vast private network of cables that this U.S. country depends on, that's all outsourced to foreign flag cable operators. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing when they're down there. I think an intelligent view of cargo for the 22nd century is to include data as cargo. We need to expand the way we think about this. $660 billion of data deliverable U.S. foreign trade, and we can't do a thing about it on our own. So that's it.
I got a comment on that as well. I'm still active in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as one of the senior mentors, and I watched how the North Atlantic Treaty Organization handled the Russian shadow fleet in the Baltic with a response called Baltic Sentry. First, it was the Secretary General commissioning an officer to go and study the problem for a year. It got progressively worse, and then Marcom, the British commander, who was just announced recently would eventually become an American commander, on Christmas Day of 2024, called in his staff and said, okay, man, battle stations, Baltic Sentry. Like 35 ships went to sea to shadow these shadow tankers to prevent them from doing things like dropping their anchor,
tearing up
wrecking
cable,
a pipeline, or wrecking undersea cables. So for us to get religion here, Steve, I could wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it was Congressman Whitman who was one of the sponsors of the Cable Security Ship Program, and it gave us all of 2 ships, and now everything else is outsourced. If we don't get religion fast, we're going to be an extremist just like they were in the Baltic, and then people are going to go, how'd this happen? Oh, the data on my phone doesn't work. Something's wrong with the satellite. It's undersea. And the last thing I'll say, I'm very fond of this. Mahan came up with the phrase sea lines of communication. At the time, at the turn of the 20th century, I don't think he realized that one of the most important slocks, sea lines of communication, in the 21st century was on the bottom of the ocean.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is a trade lane that we just ignore.
Yeah.
And you're right. We're going to regret it.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to regret it.
It's a powerful tool because Winston Churchill's first act of war as the First Lord of the Admiralty in World War I was to sever German overseas cables and screwed up some of their fleet deployment. And so you're absolutely right.
And if we don't think that's, in the Chinese thinking, I often say that the front line of the next war is going to be Main Street USA, and it's through this sort of stuff, attacks on our supply chain. So back to the question, which is MSP and TSP. These are great programs. Very important for keeping us active right now. That is, in fact, our international fleet is represented by MSP and TSP. Can they be expanded? The issue is, short answer is no, not right now, and that's because both of these programs depend on cargo as much as they depend on a stipend. And we talked a little bit about cargo early on. So they are both dependent on cargo, and the cargo has actually been falling off. So the cargo for the MSP fleet has actually been shrinking. Yeah. And so the MSP guys, great patriots, but the MSP fleet is bouncing along on what cargo they have, but you couldn't reliably expand it, because you're taking away cargo from the guys that are there now, which just makes them less important. I would also note that there are, to the extent there are issues with government programs like this, they are hostage to things like CRs and stuff like that, which makes funding a little bit unsteady, I guess is a way to put it. When businesses make commitments and investments based on a particular model of when they're going to get paid and what they're going to get paid, they really struggle when what we've committed on our side doesn't happen. So somehow we gotta fix that. But so we desperately need to shore up the cargo, and that's specifically important for the tanker security program. Tanker security program Structurally it said it was going to be 10 ships. That not really true, because 2 of the ships came over from MSP, for instance, so it could only really produce 8, but we'll leave that alone. But the fact is, there's not enough cargo to go past the ships that are in it now, even though it's been authorized for 20 ships. There's simply not enough cargo. And so until we deal with the cargo issue, that program's going to stay at 10. The interesting thing is the solutions are all around us. There's plenty of potential cargo if we would just think a little bit outside the box here on how we go about this. And I could talk about this for an hour, but a quick example is, we know that the West Coast is heavily dependent on imported refined products because they shut down all their refineries. So that refined product is coming into this country on foreign flag tankers. We ought to be thinking about maybe some of that cargo ought to be coming into this country on U.S. flag tankers. There's a little bit of a game going on where some folk, the California folks are buying oil in the Gulf. They send it over to places in the British Virgin Islands and places like that. They modify the molecules enough to get it to count as a different cargo, and then take it over to California, which is an effort to evade the Jones Act. The drawback to that, of course, is we create a liability there. We're evading the Jones Act, which has an impact on shipbuilding. It has an impact on the U.S. flag fleet. We're back to the idea that we're not treating our maritime ecosystem as a system. We're allowing stovepipe things to happen. We need to address all of this. And then things like, we have 10 tankers. We need 80, I guess, is the unclassified number.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Thank you.
We're not even close to that. We're not close, and we have no credible plan to get there. If we think that we're going to get there relying on foreign flag guys, man, I got to tell you, I'm not so sure I agree with that. Look at, Admiral, you and I talked about the Ruby Mire when you did the Red Sea.
Yeah.
You have a ship that is owned by one company, that's registered in one country, that's managed by a ship agency in a different country, using a man agency in a third country from capital. It's coming from who knows where.
Yes.
So you get 5 or 6 countries involved in this on a Liberian flag ship, and you think those guys are going to show up? Forget it. We're going to be on our own. And so we need to be thinking about how do we, I'm not talking about autarky. Trade is important. Partners are important. But being able to stand on our own when we need to is most important, because no one will stand with us if we can't stand on our own. Simple fact.
That is what a great answer. And, Steve and I got excited when you said the number for TSP ships, because we don't have enough. Tyranny of distance across the Pacific, having those spread out. And we've done war games together to this effect with Admiral Mike Wetlaufer down in Norfolk. And one of the things I wanted to say about the TSP program is we had Admiral Mark Miguez, who was now the Director of Legislative Affairs, a former Marine, and then who took a carrier strike group on a deployment, an extended deployment. He was out there in the Red Sea. And when he spoke to our Congressional Maritime Intensive Training Program for professional staffers from the Hill 2 summers ago, he said, I could not have done it without a console ship. Console meaning you can pump JP5 for the jets. You can pump diesel fuel, DFM, if you need to a MSC ship that's some kind of an oil or a tanker that can then pump to the carrier.
Yes.
So it's a 2-step process. But if it hadn't been for that console ship in the Gulf, they did 30 days worth of strikes on Houthi targets to knock those guys back. Wouldn't have happened, And think about that in the context of the big fight in the Pacific. We don't have enough. Glad to hear you say that. Next question for me. Director Carmel, you've served on various advisory boards, very admirable, the CNO Executive Panel and the Marine Board, and I'd love to hear more about that because I don't know anything about it. How will these experiences influence your collaboration with the Department of War and other agencies to ensure an effective strategic sealift campaign? And I note that, in the MAP plan released by the White House, the Secretary of War has some responsibilities for reporting back on how he's working with you and other agencies.
Thank you. And you know what? Some of the greatest experiences of my life actually were serving on those boards. CNO Executive Panel was an incredible experience. And But what it gave me and continues to give me through the relationships I established then is insight into what the Navy needs and how we can actually support that. You know, of course, being able to answer the call is important to us, but you have to be able to understand what the Navy needs. I think it's a mistake for us to just sit back and wait for someone to say, do this for us. Mainly because they don't understand what we can bring to the table. And so it's up to us to understand what the Navy's trying to accomplish and Department of War in general, and be vocal about where we can play, what we can offer, the capability we can bring to the table. Admiral, you mentioned console. Quick aside, I'm full of these. We'll be here all day if you let me continue. But
that's okay.
That's good.
So back in the mid '80s. I was actually on a tanker chartered to MSC, and we were sent to the Persian Gulf. We were doing the whole escort Iran-Iraq war stuff back then.
Oh, yes.
And our job...
Tanker war. Yes.
Our job was as a console tanker for the military, because at the time, MSC did not want to send their oilers up into the Persian Gulf. So they chartered us, and we were doing console ops back then in the 80s. So that, we could refuel the oiler.
I had no idea we went back that far. I thought it was a newer concept.
No, it's not. And that's the problem. We're coming back to what we forget.
Yeah.
This is not. We were doing console back in the 80s. I did it. I know. I was on a ship. We would go out into a monlock position out in the Arabian Gulf somewhere, sit there, console. When it was finally over, we'd go up into the Persian Gulf. Our escort at the time was usually 50 yards astern of us, very smart in their ship keeping. You remember the old cartoon, the minesweeper is the tanker, the escort is right behind us. So this is capability that we offered. We did it successfully. Back then for surface ship drivers, at the time we also had an astern refueling rig. I don't even think Navy surface ships can even do that anymore.
PCs did. I don't know anybody else who does that.
But we actually exercise that occasionally, just exercise it. But our real role was to console Navy oilers. And not only did we actually had better capability then than we had now, because when I was doing it in the 80s, we had 2 stations, one aft, one midships. Both stations were double hose, and we pumped 2 products at each station.
Wow.
So each station had a DFM hose and a JP5 hose, and so we ran 4 hoses simultaneously.
Wow.
And the current console configuration does not do that. So not only did we have to relearn whole lessons here, had we been doing that all along, this would not be some big integration that we're trying to work our way through. By the way, no criticism MSC. Hats off to MSC. I've been a partner with MSC for a very long time. Admiral Nicholson now, and Admiral Sobek before him, and Admiral Wetlaufer before him, and Admiral Mewborn. Great people. I loved working with them. And in fact, very early in my career, I actually sailed for MSC. That was my first couple ships out at Kings Point were MSC ships. Did my time in the Arctic on an MSC ship. So great people, but it's something we forgot. That's how far back it goes. And I think we need to do a better job. And so my role now with my experience is I can remind people. I can say, hey, I have a little bit of an institutional memory here. I know what we're capable of doing, what we're capable of providing. These are the things that our industry is capable of doing, and we shouldn't stand back and wait for a demand signal. We should see it coming. We should have some level of predictive capability and say, here's what I can see this problem 3 steps ahead, and I'm going to develop a solution for it right now. And there are great companies in the merchant marine world, the U.S. flag, doing that exactly, solving problems 2 or 3 steps ahead, so that when the military finally understands what they need, we're ready. So
that's fantastic. So, I had no idea you were doing this back, in the 70s. I thought it was relatively new, so that's interesting. And the other thing you said was you had 4 hoses going simultaneously. So, do you mean that in today's console ships, I thought you could pump JP5 and diesel at the same time? Is it just one?
Most of the rigs now are single hose rigs.
Single hose rigs.
So you can pump 2 products.
Yeah.
Like 1 diesel and 1 jet on each station. but you can't do two products on two stations. They're just
wow.
not.
Gotcha.
They're not double hose rigs like they were back then.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification on that. Okay, and just follow up. So, what is the Marine Board?
Oh, the Marine Board from the National Academies of Science. It's a board that's supposed to study, and does do a great job, study all things related to the broader maritime system. So they take on issues. They do a lot of work in workforce development. They've done a lot of work in alcohol prevention and things like that.
Sure,
They did a lot of work in SASH and some of the broader issues, supply chains and things like that. But it's a much broader view of maritime power than and issues related to maritime power than the typical Navy oriented. They view maritime power the way it's intended to be, which Mahan often quoted, seldom read. But maritime power is an economic concept, and the Marine Board approaches it that way.
Outstanding.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your service to the Marine Board. Oh, Steve, last question over to you.
Because we're running out of time. So to cap it off, what do you see as the single most critical challenge facing the U.S. maritime industry today, and what is your immediate priority to address it within your first 100 days as administrator? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that, I think, really the question itself is the single biggest challenge we have, in that there's some idea that there's a silver bullet. If we do this one thing, we'll get it right. It's back to the idea that we have an ecosystem and it's a system, and that means we have to do a lot of things at the same time. There's 100 chickens and eggs that we have to be able to solve. So it's like taking the map, which has 4 pillars, and saying, which pillar are we going to work on today? You can't do that. We got to work on them all at the same time. If you look at the pillars, they all have things that interact, and it's the interaction that's going to produce the kinds of results we need for a great economy or a great maritime industry. But first, I think to provide an answer, because it's probably not a lecture on networks, is not what you wanted, but
that's okay.
But the first thing we need to do really is take the map to heart and implement it. It's a great document. I would recommend it to anybody. You really need to read it. But the map, of course, it's more like a strategy document. There's a huge amount of work that's got to go into operationalizing it. And if we do that right, man, what can we accomplish? It's outstanding what we can accomplish if we do the map right. And that alone will be a great thing to work on. But second, we need to address the repair industry and the shipyard industry, as we talked about, as a system. There's a lot to it. For instance, in shipbuilding, it's not just building ships. It's all the major, we don't make engines for commercial ships here. The Salters and the MAN B&Ws don't have plants here because there's not enough through points. So we need to address that whole ecosystem. Same with repair. We need to address all of that. We need to look at the Great Lakes and make sure that we are not ignoring that. Same with actually our brown water fleet and rivers and all that kind of stuff. And last, we need to be clear-eyed about what readiness means. What does it mean to be able to fulfill our mission to carry the nation to war? And we've got to quit kidding ourselves when we do things like turbo activations and say, look at that. We got a whole pile of ships out. We did donuts in the water for 48 hours and came back in without needing a tow, and considering that a successful measure of our readiness. Yeah. So we have to be a little more honest with ourselves. And so those are some of the big things that I need to work on.
Outstanding. And folks, that's a wrap. Thank you to Mr. Carmel for joining Maritime Nation today. I would like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you have not heard our previous episode, you can always catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcast. Episodes and all content described here today can be found on our new website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org. Thanks to Jonathan Group Defense for the sponsorship and the support, and stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation. Thank you.